We are recording, and for those of you, it doesn't matter, honestly, it doesn't matter what translation you're using, because we always kind of end up differing from whatever translation. But if you have this one here, we're on page 138. We're on Psalm 31, I believe. I hope so. And it's gonna be a we're half farmers here. Yes, we have a bunch of farmers. A bunch of farmers here. So we have a nice representation today from a bunch of different places today. So this is very nice. Okay. I think the distance award maybe goes to, I'm not sure who the distance award goes for, but that to you? Okay. Okay. Agrima gets the distance award. Okay. Um, so this psalm is really this psalm and the next psalm, actually, both of them together, um, are really a little bit of a roller coaster ride. Um, and this a very tough expression of simultaneously like this incredible trust in God and overwhelming anxiety. Um, I heard I have a friend or a mentor in Los Angeles who's a very big rabbi in Los Angeles, and he told me that he was about 19, 20 years old, and he was doing what you're supposed to do as a Hasidic boy or as a Hasidic young man at 19, 20 years old. He was studying. He was in Lakewood, New Jersey, which is kind of like a very religious town, and he was studying, he was proceeding, he had just gotten married, he had just had his first kid already at 19, 20 years old, and he was sitting in the Beit Midrash, he was studying, and a sort of shabby looking guy came in and dropped a pamphlet in front of him entitled "Be Happy." It's one of those Breslov pamphlets. Breslover Hasidim are famous for these little pamphlets, and it said "Be happy," and he thought this is really a stupid thing. But he opened it up, and he looked at it, and on the first page, it started talking about how life has ups and downs. And he said that this was a remarkable thing for him, um, because nobody had ever told him before that life is supposed to have ups and downs. He always assumed that everybody was supposed to be content all the time, because after all, right, as a Hasidic Jew, right, you believe that you're doing God's will, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, okay, what you're supposed to be doing in the world, and everything should be good, right? And if it's not good, if you're not feeling great, if things are not perfect, then that means that you must be doing something wrong, or maybe you're not paying attention properly, or maybe you're, uh, you're somehow getting it wrong. And he said that he really wishes that somebody as a child had told him that life has ups and downs, because that's it's important to know, right? I mean, if it's part of the map of life is to know that life has its ups and downs, and that's certainly very evident in this particular in this psalm. We could really see the kinds of ups and downs and the emotional ups and downs that a person goes through, and that again, this is right that the persona who's writing here is David HaMelech, King David, right? Certainly a person at a very, very, very high spiritual level, a person of great responsibility, right? Also, and yet, right, he's having this experience. He's not always secure and sure of himself, and even always secure and sure of God. But you'll see that he has considerable anxiety. So it starts out. He says, "B'cha Adonai chasiti." Says, God, I take refuge in you. One of the most beautiful expressions I find again and again in the Psalms. It's this idea of taking refuge. It occurs almost no place else, I don't think, but in the Psalms, this taking refuge. It says, "Allah shali olam." It says, "Let this never embarrass me." Uh, "Ubtzikatcha valteni," and in your righteousness deliver me. And I, I love that he says, "Please don't let me be embarrassed." You know, they uh, they did a study a few years ago of children with anxiety disorders, children who got embarrassed, had social anxiety, and they started to treat. They decided to try to treat it with aspirin, right? With aspirin, with painkillers, and they found that they were as effective as other medications they were using. Um, why? Because your brain experiences pain as pain. So embarrassment, where we experience embarrassment as a real pain. It's, if you think about what you feel like when you're embarrassed, you don't just feel it intellectually, you feel it in your whole body, right? Embarrassment is, you feel, your face flushes and your muscles go weak and your stomach flutters and your breath changes and your heart beats differently. I mean, it has a profound effect. So he says, "Please let this never embarrass me, and your righteousness deliver me." Hateh elai aznecha says, "Please listen to me." By the way, it says literally, "Please turn your ear to me." So the Ibn Ezra very nicely points out, says, it doesn't mean that God has ears. It says the Torah speaks in the language of man, right? Right? Torah speaks in the language of man. So since that's how we hear by turning an ear. That's how we talk about God, even though it's only, so to speak, God obviously does not have ears. So Hatela is necha. So turn your ear to me, and please rescue me soon. Right? Uh, Again, such a normal human thing, right? To say mehera, to say soon, please, right? Don't wait. I can't take this. I can't take this for long. Hayeh litzur ma'oz. Be a rock of strength for me. We've talked about this idea of the rock many, many times. And he says, the Beit Mutzudot Hoshe'eni, says, a fortress to save me. And again, the Ibn Ezra, one of the commentators, says, why a fortress? So a fortress is a place where we're untouchable. We're high above everything, right? We're up in that this fortress is really like a tower. Mitsudo also means a tower. So up on the top of this tower, take me up above in some safe place over all of this, over all of this pain and danger that I'm experiencing. Ki salit mitzvoti ata says, because you are my support and my protection, right? Again, uses the same thing, this fortress, right? That you are my fortress and you're my protection. L'man shimcha, for the sake of your glorious name, tancheni unyancheneni, guide me and lead me. And it says, for the sake of your name. Whenever we see those words, that's an admission that maybe we're not worthy, because sometimes we ask God for things in our own merit, but do we really want to do that, right? I have so many um um I have so many faults, right? I have so many faults and so many deficiencies. Like, do I really want to be trying to ask God for my sake? Because how do I know whether I'm worthy? I don't know. But if I say for your sake, I'm here to do your will. I'm here to do your work in the world, right? I'm here to do your work in the world. And so I ask you to help me, not for my sake, but for your sake, for whatever it is that I can do for you, whatever you can do in this world. Tancheni v'yanchaneni says, guide me and lead me. And remember that he talks many, many times about asking for guidance, right? about not about not being sure what to do, right? Not knowing what to do. Of course, the rabbis, when they look at this, say, oh, this is during the time when he's being chased by Shaul. He's being chased by he's being chased by a former friend now turned enemy. Um, and and he doesn't know where to turn, but it doesn't have to. Again, we don't have to be stuck in a specific historical circumstance. We all know what this is like. We know what it's like to not know which direction to go. So he says, please, he says, Totzieni mereshet zu, says, rescue me from the net, tamnuli, in which they have hidden from me. It could also mean tamnuli. It could mean two things: to be hidden from me, or which that they've trapped me, or they've stopped me, right? And again, this image, he uses these hunting images in several places, right? Of being hunted down, of being caught in a net. Ki ata mozi, because you are my protection. Yadchav kidruchi. Say, I entrust and says, I entrust to your hands my spirit. By the way, again, the Ibn Ezra says, just because it says hands doesn't mean that God has hands, right? This is a way of speaking. I entrust, right? And when we put something in someone's hands, it means that we expect it to be protected, right? If we put something in the hands of someone that we trust, right, we expect that they're going to protect it and they're going to be very careful with whatever it is in their hands. So I take my ruach, I take my spirit. Ruach is not just my spirit, but also my ruach usually refers to a person's emotional life. My when we talk about, when we talk, even in modern Hebrew, when they talk about, like, people having, spirit, they're really into something, right? They say they have ruach. Ruach is an emotional kind of soul, an emotional kind of spirit. So I entrust that to you. It says, "Pididi altia Adonai el emet." He says, God of truth, please save me. God of truth. Now, God of truth here, like, one way of understanding this God of truth is trustworthy, right? Although there are probably better ways to say that. But literally, I think he means, I mean, God of truth. You understand what the real situation is, and I trust that you're going to be my protection. Please save me. So he continues. Saneti Hashamrim says Havle Shav. It says, I shun those who trust in empty nonsense. And that's a great that happens to be a great translation. Havle Shav, Hevel means literally the breath, but the kind of, like, just an unconscious breath, not a blowing, right? Just the breath. So empty breath. People who trust things which are ephemeral, things which are vain, which are completely ephemeral, which have no substance. He says, I hate those who trust in that. Vani, and as for me, El Hashem batachti. Says, I trusted in Hashem. I trusted in God. And this, you'll see this expression, he uses this expression several times here, right? And this is, again, common in Tehillim and in the Psalms, where he says, Va'ani. He contrasts himself. Now, it's interesting because sometimes I think he's contrasting himself to his enemies. He's contrasting himself to other people. And I think sometimes he's contrasting himself to himself, because he's when he's talking about other people, sometimes I wonder whether or not he's not projecting his own sense of doubt. Like when he says here, Saneti Hashem havle shav va'ani atnei b'tachti. Is he saying, you know what? I want to have nothing to do with those people who trust in things that don't matter. Me, I trust in God. Now that may be what he's saying. He may also be saying, you know, I hate that part of myself. I hate that part of myself that sometimes trusts in things which are really unworthy. And the better part of myself, the ani and me, the real me wants to trust in God. That's so that's me finding myself. Maybe that's me finding myself in the Tehillim. That's maybe my psychology. So reveal a little bit of my psychology in there. It says Agila v'esmacha b'chazdecha. I'm happy and rejoice in your love. So notice how he's changing his tone. He said, because he says Va'ani el Hashem atachti, because I have hope in God, and now all of a sudden we come to this happiness. Agila v'esmacha b'chazdecha. Agila, the two, we have a lot of words for certain things in Hebrew. Okay, we have a lot of words for anger, tons of words for anger. But luckily we have a lot of words for happiness also. Okay, so say anger, happiness, depression. We have a lot of those words. But here, we have these two words for happiness. One of them, which is the agila, which is the expression of happiness. So maybe you want to translate that as rejoicing. And as mecha would be like to be happy, maybe inside. It's interesting because in the translation he switches them, but I think that's not correct. I think it's the other way around. I rejoice and I'm happy. It would make more sense to say I'm happy and I rejoice. Right? It would make more sense to think from the inside, the outside. I'm going to express my inner joy, but really the outer joy seems to appear first here, which is interesting because sometimes actually that's how it works, right? Rabbi Nachman talks about this. He says, sometimes when you're having a really hard time, sometimes the best thing you can do is to act happy. Well, right. Sometimes when you're really having a hard time, the best thing you can do, right, is to do something that's happy.
Is that what Rogers and Hammerstein say? Whenever I feel bad, I whistle a happy tune.
Right, exactly. Right, exactly. And there is something to that. I mean, there is something to that. So maybe it makes sense. Agila v'esmecha b'chazdecha. I rejoice first. If I find that if I do my happy dance, that's my particular thing. Everybody has their thing. I have a happy dance. Okay. So if I do my happy dance, okay, even if I'm not happy, I will become happy from doing my happy dance. Okay. So if you want, I think I think I've posted a couple of my happy dances on Facebook. So if you take my name, Lee Weissman, and put dance, you'll probably get to see me doing my happy dances. So the problem is once you see that, you can never unsee it. So be careful. Okay. Agila v'esmecha b'chazdecha is happy and rejoice in your love. Asher ra'ita et enya as ani, because you have seen for you saw my distress, because you saw my distress. V'yadat b'tzarot nafshi. I remember, in Avatar, says, I see you. Right? It's 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 that God sees. I'm not just sitting here suffering and you don't know. I'm not. I remember once I was having a horrible day at work, and I kept walking past everybody. And everybody was just, have a nice day. No, it's California. I lived in California, Southern California. So that's how people greet each other. Have a nice day. And it was all have a nice day, have a nice day, have a nice day. And then finally somebody looked at me and said, are you okay? You look like you have a black cloud over your head. I said, no, I'm not okay. I'm having a horrible day. I just taught my seniors and they were horrible to me. And then I taught my sixth graders and they were horrible to me. And I complained and I fetched, but it felt so good to be seen. It felt so good that somebody saw me instead of just keeping going, yeah, have a nice day, have a nice day. But they actually saw me, as I am. So here that God sees, right? So God sees, he saw my distress, v'yadat b'tzarot nafshi, and he understood the suffering, the suffering or the turmoil of my soul, right? That word to know, right? That's the deep kind of knowing, right? We always go back whenever you want to know what a word means, go back to the first time it appears in the Torah. The first time the word, the verb da'at, to know, appears in the Torah is when Adam knows Eve, right? When Adam knows Eve. And we normally understand that. We say, oh, okay, that's a euphemism for lovemaking, right? But it's not a euphemism. It's not just a euphemism for lovemaking. It's to say that that's what an intimate relation is with a human being. An intimate relationship with a human being is an act of knowing, right? Is to enter into another human being, is to know them, right? And so here it says, God, so God knew in that deep way, God knows my suffering. He sees me, right? He sees my distress, right? And he understands my suffering. Tani beyad oyev. And he says, you didn't hand me to my enemies. Ve'amata b'merchav raglai. But you say, it's a nice translation. You set me down where I have space. You stood me in a place where my feet have space. There's a great experiment you can do. You can try this with your friends. Okay, try with your friends. This is a little trick you can do. I won't do it with you, but I will. But maybe I did it with you guys once. Did I do the balloon trick with you? The imaginary balloon trick? Okay. Well, if you tell people, we'll do it. We'll do the imaginary balloon trick. Okay, you up for an experiment? Up for an experiment? Okay. Okay, what I want you to do is I want you to close your eyes. Okay, I want you to close your eyes. And I want you to imagine a balloon. Okay, one of those kind of helium type balloons, and you have the string in your hand. You're holding the string in your hand. And that balloon, and see the balloon, see the color. Okay, and I want you to let go of the balloon. And I want you to follow it up into the sky. Follow it, follow it. And I want you to see where your balloon finally lands. Your balloon is going to go somewhere. Where does your balloon go? Everybody's balloon landed? Yeah? Okay.
In a nice garden by a pond.
Okay, a nice garden and a pond.
Mm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anybody else want to share? Nobody else?
A clearing in the forest.
In where? A clearing in the forest. Clearing in the forest. Okay. In a land of white clouds. Okay, kind of. Okay. In the branches of a tree. Okay. Sebastian is flying up with his balloon. He's just flying around with his balloon.
I was a little too ecological with mine. Mine burst because, of course, it expanded, and then the piece of balloon fell in the lake, and I was worried that a duck would eat it. Because Because
This
I
is
know
what I
that
have to
balloons
deal
are
with.
bad for the environment.
This is what I have to deal with.
Yeah,
Okay.
Pennywise, Pennywise the clown took my balloon.
The clown took your balloon.
Pennywise the clown.
Well,
Pennywise
normal
red balloon.
people.
Where my went to? Some clown from horror show took my
Oh,
balloon.
I'm so sorry. Well, so 90% of people, most people, actually, Nicola is very interesting. Most people, when they do this, their balloon will end up in some open space. 90%. People end up at the beach, they end up in a big meadow, they end up branch of a tree. That's one I've never heard before. But kind of like some will just, they'll be just kind of flying, going up, 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 up into the sky forever. Or they'll land in the ocean. There's usually they end up in some kind of big open space. It's mostly people end up in some sort of big open space. I think that's because I think we're kind of built to have a kind of longing for open spaces. And so I think that the image here, where he uses the image of what revach, of open space, right, is a contrast to the word for troubles. Because here, the word for troubles that he used, he says yadat b'tzarot nafshi. You understood the turmoil of my soul, but the word tsarot literally means the crampedness, right? The crampedness, right? That we experience suffering as a kind of sense of restriction, right? As a sense of restriction, as a feeling of tightness, of tightness and restriction. And you says, you didn't give me over to my enemies, but instead you set me down into a place where I could feel some freedom, where I felt space. Instead of feeling restriction, I could feel space. Chaneni Adonai ki tzarli. He says, please be gracious to me, God, for I'm troubled. See, now it's you see how he's going up and down, right? 1 minute he's saying like I'm relieved, and then the anxiety comes back. He says, Chaneni, be gracious to me, not because I deserve it, right? Grace is something that's given to you, right? Chen, grace, is given to you not because you deserve it, but because of the graciousness of the Creator. Chaneni Adonai ki tzardi. So be gracious to me, God, for I'm troubled. Ashasha, because I says my eyes are worn out from. It says because he translates this as anguish, right? But the word kas usually means anger, right? That mixture of feelings that we have when we're anxious and upset, it's difficult to distinguish them, right? It's are we sad? Are we angry? Are we furious with ourselves? Are we furious with the world? Are we are we just in pain? And so here he says, my eyes are tired from the anger. Nafshi ubitchi. He says, my spirit, my spirit, and nafshi means literally my physical well-being, right? My physical, the soul, my soul that's connected to my body, my my spirit in that sense, and says and my stomach, right? And my stomach, I guess maybe he's talking about his like enteric brain, right? How you feel the anxiety, you feel the anxiety in your gut, right? So it says my guts also. So my eyes are worn out from anguish, my spirit and my guts, my stomach. It says, Ki chadu biagon chayai. Says my life is passed in sorrow. Shnotai be'anacha, and my years in sighing. Yagon v'anacha, those two always go together. Sorrow and sighing. My path is, and says Hashal, ba'avoni kochi. It says my strength is weakened because of my transgressions. V'atzmai ashishu. And my bones have decayed. You know, my bones. And the word bones doesn't just mean this is atzamai etzem of something, means also the essence of something. It's not just the bones. It's not just the bones. So when he says atzamai, he's talking about his body, you know, because he just talked about his eyes and his stomach, and right. But he's saying like my very structure, right? I'm falling apart here, right? I'm falling apart here. I'm falling apart. Even my bones are decaying. Mikol, this is Mikol Tzarai, from all of my persecutors, from all those people who trouble me. Ti'iti cherpa. Says I've become a joke. Cherpa. I've become an object of scorn. I've become something that that cherpa is something which is, you know, nowadays if you want to really insult somebody, right, you want to say like you are a disgrace. That's the word, disgrace, right? You're a disgrace, cherpa. So I've become, right, my persecutors have made me a disgrace. Especially to my neighbors, especially to the people around me. Upachad mudai. He says, and the people who are even people who are my friends, right, who know me, he says they're terrified of me. They see me in the street and they run away. He's become like a pariah. He's become like a pariah, you know. Now, again, you know, there are two ways to look at this, right? If some commentators will look at this and say, okay, let's look at the life of David HaMelech, and let's see when did this happen to him, and you know when would it be that when people saw him in the street they would run away from him, or is this just the experience of a normal person who, you know, when we're having a hard time, people avoid us. That's the truth, right? I mean, you know, when I described earlier, you know, walking in the school and everybody's going, "Have a nice day, have a nice day, have a nice day," right? Well, I'm sure there were some that didn't bother to say "Have a nice day," but just kind of, you know, moved on the other side of the hallway because they didn't want to have to deal with the fact that there was a guy walking down the hallway with a cloud over his head. Right? We avoid people who we're, you know, it's do his friends hide their true thoughts and feelings from him? There are many ways to take flight. True, right? There are lots of ways for people to hide from us and to keep their distance, and it's very painful. You know, it's very painful, and it's very painful to feel like a disgrace, right? That feeling of being a disgrace, and that, you know, that people are somehow disgusted by you, right? That is a very, very hard, it's a very, very hard feeling. So he says, Nishkachti, this is a tough one also a tough one. Nishkachti kamemi lev. I have been forgotten. I've been forgotten like somebody. I've been forgotten from people's hearts like somebody who's dead. Like somebody who's dead. You know, it's like I've just sort of faded into non-existence. Now, there's another way of reading this, by the way, and I saw one of the commentators read it this way. It says, "Shachachti, I have been forgotten. Kamet milev, like a person whose heart is dead." like a person whose heart is dead. Which would be, which
Yeah, I
would
was
be,
just gonna say that. I've got the Sears Mykov Breslov translation here, and yeah, there's a footnote here. Rebbe Nachman reads this verse homiletically. I have forgotten because the heart is dead, and our sages teach the eye's seeing depends on the heart. So Tosafot explains that when what the eye sees determines what the heart sees,
right,
perceives, and understands. So if you're in this, cloud of black, then you're going to see everything is all black because your heart is dead.
right,
Is how I read that.
right.
Yeah.
And so, right, so that's a very, right, that's how, actually how I would read it also, right? I would read it that way. I would read it that way also. Shachachti kamed, somebody whose heart, whose heart is dead. And I think that's again, that's an experience I think many of us have had, where you just, where the core of your being has just disconnected, right? Where the core of your being just disconnects and you're unable, and of course, people do all sorts of things just to feel, right? People cut and things like that, all sorts of things, just because their hearts are hurting so bad, that they go numb. So that's what he says. That's what he says about. It's what he says about himself. And he says, "Ha'iti kichli oved." He says, "I'm like." It's interesting. Okay, so translations are different. I wouldn't read it this way either. He says, "Became like an object abandoned as lost." That's one way of thinking about it. Like I become an abandoned. This is a little bit of a legalistic. There's a whole the whole kind of legal background to this, I guess. Lost objects. In Judaism, there's a whole law about, recovering lost objects. He says, like, I'm like an object that's been abandoned. I'm like something that's been lost and nobody cares to find it anymore, right? That's sort of like an orphan object. Or you can understand it that I'm like a kli oved, like I'm like a vessel that's worn out. I'm like a vessel that's I'm like a vessel, and he uses other ways. He uses like a kli nishbar, like a broken vessel, right? Like a broken vessel. I'm no longer useful, But here, it's like, why are people calling me? I imagine it's a mistake. Okay, I'm not sure why somebody was calling me, but that's interesting. So it's a so like a worn out. I've become like a worn out vessel, which no, I was thinking, when you say clean nishbar, a broken vessel, right? I think of a pot, and when I think of a worn out vessel, I think of like a leather bag, like they have the old fashioned kind of leather bags that they use in the Middle East to carry water. So imagine one of those kind of like worn out and worn so much that it can't hold water anymore. Kishamati dibat rabim says, I heard the planning of many. Migor misaviv says, all around and frightening. Vihivas dam vihivas dam yahad alai. He says that they schemed together against me. He says, and they're plotting to kill me. Right? He's talking about his enemies again. Right? Says, I can hear them. I can hear them plotting against me. I can hear that they're scheming against me. Va'ani. But me, right? Again, he says that same thing. Va'ani, but me. Alecha b'tachti Adonai. He says, but I put my trust in you. V'amarti Elohai ata. And I say you are my God. He says, yeah, I hear all this. I hear all this. I can feel the negative forces of my enemy and my enemies, and they're drawing around me. Okay, but me, I know I trust in you, and I said that you are my God. Biyadcha says itotai. Says whatever is going to happen to me, right? Itotai, we're literally my times, whatever occurs to me, Biyadcha is in your hands. Hatzileni miyad oivai. So deliver me from my enemy's grasp, umrodvai, and from those who pursue me. One of the most beautiful lines in all of Psalms is where David says, better to fall in the hands of man. I mean, the hands of God, than in the hands of man, because God is kind. Right? When we fall into the hands of human beings, we never know what we're going to get. Human beings can be very cruel. It can be very, very cruel. So he says, take me out of my enemy. Whatever happens to me is going to be in your hands, but please deliver me from my enemies and from the people who pursue me. It says, let your light shine on your servant, and save me with your love. It's a beautiful, just beautiful prayer where he calls himself, of course, he goes, understand that this is a king speaking, right? And he refers to himself as the servant or the slave of God. Adonai alavosha. God, let me not be ashamed. And remember we said before, he's talked about that. He started at the very, very beginning. He talked about that feeling of feeling ashamed. And again, he talks about not wanting to feel ashamed, and not wanting to feel ashamed, not wanting to feel embarrassed. Ki karaticha, it says, because I've called on you. Yevushu rashayim, let the wicked be embarrassed. Yidmu nishon, and silenced into the underworld. Right. So let them be silenced, let them be ashamed, but not me. Right? Please don't let me be ashamed. Alma says siftei shaker. Still the lips of false lips, or lips of lying, right? The people who lie. Hadovrot ad Sadiq atak says those who lie about the righteous. But it's interesting, like he calls himself, one of the things he calls himself tzaddik, he calls himself righteous. Other places he calls himself chassid, he calls himself pious. So how do you call yourself that? How do you call yourself tzaddik? How do you call yourself a righteous person? How do you call yourself chassid? And a person has to be honest about themselves, even if they're great, and maybe especially if they're great, right? The highest level, the highest level of humility is to be able to speak honestly about your strengths and to be honestly about your greatness, right? If you're a great comedian, you should be able to say, I am a great comedian. That's right? If you're a great comedian, say, I'm a great, that's especially for you. It's like, I'm a great comedian. You say, I'm a great comedian, right? You should be able to say the truth about yourself, right? Able to say the truth about yourself. It's not, he says, please, says, I'm a tzaddik. He says, I'm a righteous person. I'm a righteous person. So please help, please help me out. It says, Al Tzaddik Atak, Begava Bavuz. Okay? He says, stifle the false lips of those who lie about the righteous with arrogance and contempt. Right? So the people who lie about me with arrogance and contempt, let them be silent. Ma Rav Tucha. How great is your good. How great is Asher Safanta Lirecha, that you reserve for those who fear you. And here, reserve, tzafanta, also means like that you hide, right? Sometimes you think like, where's the good? Like, okay, here I am trying to be a decent, relatively God-fearing, good person, as best as I can. Okay, not so but I'm doing my best. Okay, if I'm doing my best, so where's the good? Where's the good that's supposed to be for me in this world? So it says here, that you hid for your, it's hidden. Sometimes we don't see it, but nevertheless, he says, he says, Ma Rav Tucha. Says, how great is your good? And it's interesting, Ma Rav, how great, is literally Ma means what? Means what? So, Ma Rav Tucha, what is this great good that you have hidden for those people who are, what is this great good that you have hidden for those people, for those people who fear you? It says, the people, all you have done, for the people who take refuge in you. It says, Nega b'nei Adam. It's clear for all. It says, it's clear. That's a good. Sure, if I'm not happy with the translation, but let's see. Nega b'nei Adam. It's in front of the world to see, right? The world can understand. The world can see that there is a good that's hidden for those people who are trying and striving to be righteous. It says, Tastirem b'setu panecha. Says, hide them in the safety of your presence. Literally, hide them in the hiding of your face. It's a beautiful expression. It says, Miruksei ish, from the bands of wicked men. Titzpanem b'sukkah. It says, hide them in your shelter, right? Hide them, again, that same word, hide them in your shelter. It's Merilu Shonot, from against cutting tongues, right? So protect them from those dangerous tongues. I know I'm over, but let's try to finish the psalm, if that's okay. I'm sorry I'm over a little bit, so forgive me if you have to go. It's always be recorded, but let's try to do it. Which won't do it. Baruch Adonai ki hifli chazdoli be'ir matzur. Thank God for his blessings. He showed me his wondrous love when I was in a city under siege. And I says, in my panic, right? Now he goes back and he reminds himself of what he was feeling at that time. And I said in my panic, says, says, I'm blocked off from his sight. Says, but you heard the sound of my plea when I cried out to you. I thought you couldn't see me. I thought you couldn't hear me, but I cried out and you heard me. Says, Ehevu et Adonai kol chasidav. All of you who are devoted to God, love him. Love God, all of you all of you are chasidav, all of his pious ones. It says, Emunim noter Adonai. Says, God shields the faithful. God shields the shalem. Says, Ayeter oseh gava, and repays the arrogant precisely. Shalem al yeter, not just al yeter. Al yeter doesn't just mean precisely, more than they deserve. He says, don't worry, the arrogant will get what they deserve. Don't think that the people who hurt you that they'll get off scot-free. Okay, don't worry, they get what they deserve. Let your hearts be strong and brave. All those people who hope in God, that you should be strong. And so we'll leave you with that blessing. All those who have faith and trust in Hashem and seek Hashem should have good, strong hearts. Thoughts?
You can graph this along, if you can graph this entire psalm,
Yeah.
you can see it go up where he says something hopeful and then it goes down. Something you can
Yeah, I said at the very beginning,
undulate.
it's like a roller coaster. Yeah, it's like a roller coaster. He goes up, he goes down. He goes up, he goes down. And sometimes he's in the present, sometimes in the past. He says, I remember this happened. And then it was like, and then no. And Vani is like, I like this, and and then me, it's you can almost hear him like struggling with himself inside. It's really. And the next one is very similar in that respect. I think you'll hear the roller coaster again. The next one. Okay. More thoughts? Okay. Bezrat Hashem, I'll see some of you on Wednesday. Thank you so much for coming. I really, really appreciate it. It's a joy for me to see you all, and wish you 2 days of great blessings. And if not 2 days, a whole week. And if not whole week, a whole month, a whole year, a whole life. And I love you guys, and bye.
Well, same to you. Thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Right.